What is the worst way you or someone you know has been fired from a job? My dad told me once about a coworker getting fired on take your daughter to work day. It was before lunch too, so they both had to be escorted out of the office carrying their brown paper lunch bags. Being the top dog of the FBI and finding out over CNN. I worked in retail and our manager fired a guy after his 12-hour shift on Black Friday. Cold spent the day after Thanksgiving with his family, but instead, the manager made him work in case it was busy, then fired him at the end of his shift. It was a douche move. I had a friend who worked in an office doing office type shit. One day, his boss croaked, and he was made interim boss. Anyways, he busted his ass in order to try and keep his new position. A month later, he interviewed. A week later, his boss called him into the office and said, "You know, we really wanted to hire you. I was rooting for you, but someone with more experience and qualifications got the job. Do you mind training him?" They asked him to train his replacement. I posted this in an AskReddit thread about a week ago, but it fits this thread perfectly. When I was in my early 20s, I was about 9 months into a job at a retail store, and I had been working my ass off for a chance to be part of a new department that the store was about to open. I aced my review, and I got the promotion to the brand new department. It was going to be more challenging work. It came with a pretty hefty pay bump. I would have my own office, and the work would be impactful to the whole company. The promotion didn't kick in until the start of the next week. I was laid off that Friday. When they were asked to cut payroll, management literally selected the people who were making the most money. My name was listed next to the salary I hadn't yet received. Instead of admitting that they fucked up and keeping their best performing employee at that store, they doubled down and tried to hold my last paycheck ransom until I trained my replacement in the job that I hadn't even done yet. The store owner just happened to be around that day. Normally he was a very kind man and knew everyone by name. I tried to explain the ridiculous situation to him, and he just told me to go home. In a rare moment of frustration, I said something to the effect of, "You know, bullshit like this kills stores." He coldly replied, "Hastings will be around longer than you." I guess the joke is on him. I was working 20 feet up a ladder on the side of a house. I hear a BB gun fire and the pellet hit the wall a few feet beside me. After a couple more of these, I turn around, tell the fat kid standing in the yard, if he does that shit again he better be able to outrun my hammer. Mom starts screaming about me threatening her kid. 15 minutes later I'm unemployed. Friend of mine helped secure a big contract for the company he was working for. An incentive for getting contracts is you get a percentage of the profit. He just started working there about 2 months prior and went out on his own several states away to talk to a potential customer from a lead he got at a convention. Basically, "Oh yeah, I have a buddy who's looking into that. You should meet him in person," out of his own pocket. He secured the deal, called his supervisor to tell him, was congratulated, then drove 12 hours back home. His payout would have come out to around $40,000 over 5 years. Went into work the next day and was fired for suspicion of theft, and the boss of the division, not the supervisor, that guy's lower, would be taking over all his current stuff. He lawyered up immediately, but since he was still on his probationary period and they could fire him without cause, nothing but the finder's fee, around $3,000, was to be paid to him. Basically his boss tossed him to get some free money. It's a long story, but I was early in my career. I wasn't fired for a good reason and I hadn't really stood up for myself yet. I just took abuse from management and did the best I could. It was my GM's birthday and we all had to pick names out of a hat and we had to buy them a cake etc for their birthday. Well, I had the GM who wanted to do his birthday in the morning with bagels. So I picked up 30 plus bagels, cream cheese, giant thing of coffee, and we had this stupid bagel birthday thing, or whatever. Half hour later I get back to my desk, I'm called 2 hours, and I was fired. Oh, and thanks for the bagels. Ex-public accountant here. In 091 of the firms in my city laid off about 30% of its staff without warning a week after busy season, i.e. these poor accountants just worked 80 to 100 hour weeks with no days off for the last 2 to 3 months for an annual $50,000 salary. I would have literally taken off my boss's high heel and tried to stab her in the jugular, Happy Gilmore style, if she would have pulled that shit on me. We were having a departmental meeting, and the head of engineering, Miran, was giving a speech about how all of our customers are happy, and how all of his ideas are fucking awesome. Both of these were very false, so he was either lying or is disillusioned. Next his boss is giving her presentation, and the little email message popped up at the bottom corner of the screen saying you need to fire Miran. Miran was soon fired, and good riddance. My first job ever was for Baskin Robbins, when I was 15. I went in for my first day of training excited to finally be making pocket money. The owner made me try to memorize the ice cream flavors in the first 30 seconds of being there. When I was unable to recite them perfectly in their order, he did this big hand motion and screamed training over. I laugh now, but man, that was crushing for a nervous teenager. Not quite fired yet, but today 3 of us publicly confronted our boss over proof of her committing fraud and embezzlement. The organization serves people with mental health conditions, and we confronted her during a public meeting in front of those the organization serves. It was painful, we hated doing it, but the truth needed to come out. Girl I knew was here on work visa. She had been working at a company for several years that treated her well, but ended up moving and got a job at a new one. Her boss apparently used her as a scapegoat, set her up with impossible bullshit tasks, like planning the office Christmas party about a week beforehand, then fired her shortly before Christmas. That meant her work visa expired, and she was going to be sent back to her home country. Apparently it's the law that the employer in this case pay for the fired employee's plane ride home, and her boss chose to fly her out on Christmas. Girl was a meth user and had a playful nickname Twitch among the nursing staff. Problem was, she was a major suck up to management, so they looked the other way and just called her quirky, until she twitched so hard she fell out of a chair and ruined a couple of blood samples, delaying a few surgeries. Expensive liability, major public disaster, so a drug test could no longer be avoided. She made a second major scene fighting over giving one, and security escorted her out of our lives forever. This one resonates to me as I was let go 3 weeks ago. So story time. I was hired at a company back in October by a woman whom I consider the best boss I ever had. Awesome person. Kickers marketer. We are still friends to this day. Anyway, at the end of December, before we go on a New Year break, she tells us she is leaving for a much better company. I don't blame her. The company is awesome. Now when we get back, I instantly inherit all of her work and basically become a director of marketing without the title. I proceed to bust my ass to pick up all the new duties, make sure everything is attended to, and try to make a case for being the replacement. Well, the VP goes ahead and does interviews. We meet with some candidates. Ultimately they hire the one who was my last choice of the 4. I didn't like her. She was just off. Anyway, I take it in stride and just go back to doing my job well. For the next 3 weeks I proceed to continue doing all of the work I was doing before she arrived, and then some, while teaching her the business and how we did things. Well, 3 weeks ago today I come into the office, go about my routine, and then get pulled into an office where I see hours. I instantly feel sick to my stomach. She then proceeds to terminate my position due to budget, and I'm let go. No severance, no real explanation, nothing. So basically I manned a department for nearly 4 months, trained the new director, and was then laid off by her 3 weeks into her tenure. Oh, and I found out she quickly replaced me with a friend she had worked with at 4 other companies. Needless to say it sucked, and I was livid. My mom worked for a small medical practice that was fast on its way to bankruptcy. Her boss gave her a promotion without raise, and over the course of the next year, made her fire her coworkers one by one. She came to realize the reason she was promoted was so her boss could make her do the firing, while he avoided everyone. Her coworkers saw what was happening, but still drifted away from their friendships with my mom as they saw her as an accomplice with the boss. The stress of firing her peers and feeling completely isolated at work was really eating away at my mom right up until the day her boss fired her too. I'm sure there's worse ways to get canned, but my mom is a sweet woman who hadn't yet learned to speak up for herself, and I'm disgusted at the lack of character and integrity her boss had. I was in a wreck on New Year's Day of 2009. A drunk driver hit me, injuring my leg up really badly. The driver didn't have insurance, their tags were fake, and their license was suspended at the time of the accident, so I was fucked. I couldn't walk, and my job was being a soda merchandiser, so I was on my feet all day long. After reporting this to my employer, they told me to concentrate on getting well and to report back to management after seeing the doctor after a week or two of rehab. My doctor stated I may have to have surgery and wanted to run some tests, so I called my boss after an appointment. While I was being rolled out of the waiting room in a wheelchair, my boss fired me over the phone. On night shift, a coworker comes in and tries to log into the computer system. It doesn't work. She's locked out of everything. She'd also had trouble clocking in. The night shift supervisor is off that night. This lady starts freaking out and crying. She says she knew they were looking for a reason to fire her. When were they planning on telling her? What is she supposed to do now? Despite multiple people reassuring her that if they were going to fire her, this is not the way they would do it, and suggesting there might just be a mistake, she is still determined that she's been fired and they forgot to tell her before they cut her access. She goes home and doesn't come in the next night either. She won't answer calls and is out for the rest of the next week. Turns out they hadn't fired her, but they had been looking for a reason to fire her. Not calling and not showing up for work was enough of a reason, so then she really was fired. Summoned 17 people, 20% of the entire workforce, to the operations manager's office 8 AM Friday, the day before the company Christmas party, where bonuses are handed out, usually to the tune of $2K each. 2 weeks before Christmas, no job, no bonus, needing to cancel a date night with their SOS. Morale wasn't too good. 2 months later, another wave of firings occurred. One of the guys was partying in La the night before and called in sick. They forced his supervisor to call him repeatedly at home, telling him it was mandatory he showed up. He lived 35 to 40 minutes away. Bowers was waiting in the parking lot. Parked. They handed him a packet and check, turned around and drove 40 minutes back home. I worked at a place that was sold to investors. They brought in a hotshot CEO to bump up the numbers, then sold to our major competitor. During the transition, about 20 people were let go in one day. The head of ours, M, and the other our employee, F, spent all day at it. It wasn't easy, since a lot of the employees had been there since the early days, 15 plus years. There were tears, some shouting, the awkward "Hey, am I just stand here casually while I make sure you don't get weird while you clean out your desk, also I'm so sorry this is happening" thing. After a whole day of that, the head of ours turns to the other our employee and tells her, "Oh BTW, we are gonna have to let you go too." You may ask, how did I know there were tears, shouting, etc.? Because that skeezy butthole head of ours shared all the gory details with my coworker the next day in our open office workspace. She didn't ask, but he needed to tell someone. To this day I get mad thinking about it. They broke up half of our office for a mandatory meeting on a Monday morning. They told our group they had sold our department, and in 2 weeks we could either take the job with the new company or get lost. 5 minutes after they basically fired us all, they said, "Oh, by the way, here are your new bosses, so make a good impression." We were all angry and in shock, and later on I found out our soon to be ex-bosses were shocked and embarrassed by our reaction. I'm so glad to be out of that shithole, though. I made the horrifically naive mistake of telling a coworker I thought was a decent person I was putting out feelers after the clinic I was on probationary period. It extended my probationary period for a third time instead of hiring me on. The very next day I was called into the administrator's office and was ordered to explain why I would be so disloyal. I explained that I had become concerned when they extended my probationary period for a third time and I was only putting out feelers. The administrator claimed that they had invested a lot of time and money into me and that I had nothing to worry about. I wasn't going anywhere. So, the next day, when I was scheduled to have my weekly meeting with the very same administrator, I was feeling quite relaxed and confident. I sat casually in the office and smiled at her when she came in looking all tense. She then proceeded to tell me that I was being let go. When I asked why, "You said I had nothing to worry about yesterday." She just sighed and said, "You just don't seem confident that you're going to get the job." There was a brief moment of me silence, and I said, "You mean you're firing me because I don't seem confident you're not going to fire me?" That's when she got flustered, like visible upset, smacked her hands on the table, and said while shuffling papers nervously, "You know this is a right to work state, right?" "Yes. That means I don't have to give you a reason. They are just letting you go." Then she offered to call security, because I guess she thought I was going to be as upset about losing that shitastic job as she was about having to fire me in such a shitty way. I assured her that security was unnecessary and that I would leave quietly. It was embarrassing, bewildering, and obviously quite unethical, but that's living in a right to work state for ya. Oh, and working in a hospital. A former colleague of mine said she had some big news to tell me, and she'd be in town for a few days, and wanted to grab some drinks. We chit-chatted some small talk about how work was going, and I mentioned that I was about to fire a development company we worked with, and had already signed a contract with their replacement. I went on and on for a few minutes about how pathetic the former partner's productivity had been, and how it had hit rock bottom over the years. Then she told me her big news. She had just accepted a position at the company I was firing the next day, and she was assigned to be my project manager. Needless to say, the rest of the drink meeting was a bit awkward. My boss was an idiot, and one of the corporate heads had told him he had to fire somebody, so instead of thinking about who to fire, he waited until Halloween to fire someone. He didn't want to make an unpopular decision. It was during our Halloween party and he tried to fire our quality assurance guy, but somehow was talked into firing someone else. So this guy got fired on Halloween, because our boss didn't want to look stupid and go back to his first decision and fire the first guy. There was a big argument and our boss even tried to offer him a Chili's coupon.